Hi there, this is MC Oda, and today I am back down in the ancient city. I already made a video where I explored the details of the redstone circuit that I'm standing on right now. I do encourage you to go watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. Well, after I made that video, I discovered there are 3 different city centers in the ancient city, and each one of those has a completely different circuit in this main room. So in this video, I'm going to explore the differences, and we're going to see how those other 2 work. If that sounds fun to you, come join me in my creative flat world. Okay, well here we are now in my creative flat world where I have each one of the 3 different city centers. The first thing I want to do is show you how to identify the 3 different ones and show you how to get inside each one the proper way. Okay, let's start over here with city center number 1. This one is really easily identified by the fact that it is just kind of a flat nothing right here, right below this main gate. So when you get to this gate, you'll see it's just a couple of tiered simple stairs and then a whole lot of just flat bricks and nothing special going on. If you find this city center and you want to get inside, it is a surprisingly easy way to go about it. All you have to do is once you're up on this top platform, look on this left side and there is this one piece of chiseled deep slate. Let me get a little bit of a bird's eye view so you can see that. See, it's got these just these 3 flat stairs and then this big flat area. Well, right here is this one chiseled deep slate. If you want to get inside this city center the proper way, all you have to do is stand on top of that chiseled deep slate and make any noise. That's right, stand on top of here and say, maybe just jump. And that noise will actually open the gate. If I run down here, you see now these doors are open and we can get inside this city center. And in a few moments, those doors will snap back closed. And if you didn't make it in time, you'd have to go back up and just do the same thing. Yep, that's it. This one is that simple. Just stand on top of this deep slate brick, make any noise you want, and those doors will open up. Okay, now let's fly over here to city center number 2. Now this is the one I talked about in full detail in my first episode, so we're not going to go over all the details in this video, but I will still give you a brief overview. City center number 2 is identified easily by this chest sitting right here on this kind of broken up platform that's directly below the gate. If you want to get inside this one, you have to make a very specific sound. And you can make that sound pretty much anywhere in this indented part here, although I would kind of stick to the left side here on top of these deep slate tiles. If you make just any random sound like say jumping or placing a block or something, the doors won't open. It has to be a very specific sound. And that sound has to be either eating a piece of food or drinking a drink. And an easy way to remember that is if you look inside this chest, they actually provide 1 golden apple in case you have nothing else that you can eat. Also, a golden apple can be eaten even if you're not hungry, which is probably another reason why they provide it for you. So again, stand anywhere here on this platform and eat a piece of food or drink a bottle of water or something. Hop on down here and these doors will be open and you can run on in here. And again, they're going to snap shut after about, 10 to 20 seconds, so you have to be kind of quick to get down here. And one more thing to note about this one, just due to the actual range that the skulk sensor can pick up, not only can you be pretty much anywhere on this part of this top platform, you can actually stand right here in the left side doorway, all nestled in here, and then this one square is also in range, as you can see. So again, that was city center number 2, recognized by this broken up platform and the chest with the golden apple. So now let's take a look at city center number 3. This one is identifiable by the polished deep slate stairs coming up to this top flat part, and the fact that this top part has these 2 rows of deep slate tile walls that have deep slate tiles underneath them on the floor. And this one is by far the easiest one to get into, because as you'll see, the doors are already open. Yep, that's right. In its default state, this city center already has the doors open. So remember, if you see this city center with these walls up here, you can just hop on down and just stroll right on in. And those doors will never close on you. There's actually a reason for that, but we'll get into those details later. Okay, now that we know exactly how we need to get inside each one of these 3, let's explore the circuits and find out why. And to make this a little bit easier, I'm just going to have to remove part of this structure on each of these gates. so that we can get a much better look at the circuits inside of them. Okay, there we go. Here's a nice bird's eye view of the 3 different circuits. You can see right off the bat that they look wildly different from each other. 2 of them, gate number 1 and gate number 2, are functionally very similar, and gate number 3 is totally different. But before I start explaining the differences, I do want to point out the fact that this big circuit here that controls these doors, that's not the only redstone circuit within these ancient city centers. There's also a circuit over here, which is kind of showing how redstone power works and what kind of blocks the power can be transferred through. There are also 2 other small circuits over here, kind of demonstrating how a lectern and a target block with a piston will work. Those 3 circuits are actually the same in all 3 of these city gates, so we don't need to go over those. Those are in my first video, so again, I suggest watching that video if you haven't seen it yet. So let's first take a brief look at City Center number 2. I said I wasn't going to go over this one in detail because I already have, but for the folks who missed that, I still want you to see how it works and see how it relates to City Center number 1. Okay, first of all 3 of these circuits share one thing in common, and that starts from this repeater right here going forward. This is just a simple line of redstone with repeaters that keep those piston doors closed whenever this is powered and lets them open whenever this is not powered. Everything behind this repeater is what makes the circuits activate differently and perform differently. So at the core of each one of these 3, there is a waterlogged skulk sensor. And the only reason it is waterlogged is because a waterlogged skulk sensor just won't make any noise when it's activated. That's it, no other special reason, just so that whenever it activates, the player doesn't hear that little chirp chirp noise. So let me demonstrate. I'm going to walk around this one and you're going to visually see it activate. It's going to change colors and you'll see some little redstone sparkles come out from it. See that? That's activating and we do not hear a sound. But now let me go ahead and remove the water. And now you can see it and hear it. Okay, another one that each 3 of these circuits has is a comparator here, and that is to read the signal from that skulk sensor. The skulk sensor will actually power any redstone component that's next to it, or any redstone dust that's next to it. But the reason why they use a comparator here is that if you have any redstone device that's generating a signal, and I don't mean redstone power, it can just be like a signal strength, then this comparator can actually read it either by sitting directly next to it or through a solid block that's adjacent to it. All right, I feel like I might have confused a few of you with that one. Let me explain that one. Okay, say we had a skulk sensor sitting on the ground here, and we had some redstone dust leading out from it. When we activate the skulk sensor, it actually lights up that redstone. Similarly, if we have a redstone component that's directly next to this skulk sensor, when we activate that skulk sensor, it'll activate that redstone device as well. Now, as far as the comparator reading it, a comparator will also read the signal from it while it's directly connected to it. And just like that comparator is reading directly from the skulk sensor, if we put a solid block between the skulk sensor and the comparator, this one will actually read it as well. Ooh, that thing pushed me up in the air. There we go. Let's stand around this side. There we go. Okay, so not only is this comparator reading the redstone power level that's coming from that device, it's also reading like a signal strength. And I'm not really sure what this is called exactly, but the reason why I chose a different word was because there are some things that kind of, we'll say, emit a signal that the comparator can read, but is not actually providing power. And the best example I can think of is to show you a chest. If we were to put a comparator coming out of a chest, you can see that it's not reading anything from it. Now, let's put some stuff in that chest. Now you can see that this comparator is reading a signal from that chest. But the chest itself isn't powering anything, right? It's not powering redstone. It's not powering redstone devices. It's just that it emits a signal that the comparator can read. So yeah, just keep that in mind. When a comparator is reading a device, it can be a redstone power level, or it can just be, again, for lack of better words, a signal strength. Okay, let me clean this stuff up and get back into the circuits. All right, so coming back in here, once this comparator reads the signal from this skulk sensor, this part of the circuit here is what tells the game to only trigger this circuit if you're eating or drinking. Every sound that you make in the game actually has like a frequency number, and unfortunately there's no way in the game to tell what those numbers are. You just have to look them up on the wiki page. Like for example, I think walking is like a frequency of 1, jumping is like a frequency of 2, placing a block is like a 12, I think removing a block is like a 13, but eating and drinking is a frequency of 8. And when I say frequency of 8, all that means is that the skulk sensor is going to release a signal strength of 8 whenever you eat or drink. And that's important for this circuit because this whole mechanism makes sure that only a signal strength of 8 will actually trigger this torch to pulse power and trigger the rest of the circuit. Okay, so the rest of the circuit starts from this torch onward. Now, a skulk sensor only releases a pulse of power, as you were seeing earlier. Instead of a steady power source, like as if you flicked a lever, it just sends a pulse of power and then the power stops. So whenever you trigger this skulk sensor with a frequency of 8, eating or drinking, this torch will turn on for a moment and then turn back off. And whenever this torch turns on, that redstone signal will go through this redstone, through these comparators, and into this block. Once this block is powered, it'll turn that torch off, which leads to this repeater turning off, and therefore this whole circuit turning off and those doors opening. But if this torch was only turned off for the amount of time that that pulse of energy was coming from that skulk sensor, then the only person who'd be able to make it through that door would be someone wearing a red suit with a lightning bolt on his chest. A normal Minecraft player would not have time to hop on down there and run through those doors. So that's where this part of the circuit comes in. And this part of the circuit here, this array of comparators and redstone dust, is what we call a pulse extender. This is going to take the pulse of energy coming from this torch turning on and then off and extending the length of it for a given amount of time. And what that will result in is that this torch will remain off for that full extended duration of time and will only turn back on once it's done. And that's what gives the player plenty of time to run on down and through those doors. Okay, so to recap our brief description of City Center number 2, you need to either eat or drink within the range of that skulk sensor, which is either on this part of the platform here or directly inside this left doorway. This part of the circuit ensures that only eating or drinking will trigger it. Any other sound that is a lower or higher frequency than that will not trigger this circuit. When the circuit does trigger, it sends a pulse of power, and that pulse is extended to a longer duration to keep those doors open long enough for you to walk through. Okay, now let's look at City Center number 1 and see how it's similar to that one. And again, City Center number 1 is the one with the flat top and that one piece of chiseled deep slate that you need to stand and make noise on. When we come and look at the redstone behind it, you see this familiar array of comparators and redstone dust. This is the pulse extender. And now here's one of the big differences between this one and that one. That one had a circuit that caused it to only trigger with the frequency of 8. This circuit is missing that. If you take a look at the comparator that is reading the signal from the skulk sensor here, there is no circuit here between it and the torch that it's going to pulse on and off besides a redstone repeater, which is why any sound at all will trigger this one. Again, walking, jumping, eating, breaking a block, shooting a bow, any sound that you make standing on that block above will trigger this one. Now, why do you have to be standing on this block specifically? Let me demonstrate why this is the case. So a skulk sensor can pick up any sound vibration at all if you're in range of it through the air, as you can see. Now, any block that is between you and the skulk sensor will still trigger it. See, you can still see the little blue vibration animation, and you can still hear that thing trigger. So as far as the skulk sensor is concerned, every block is invisible to it. It will hear your sound through anything, except for wool. If you make sound and there is wool between you and the skulk sensor, it will not hear you. So I can run and jump as long as that wool is blocking me, it's not going to trigger. So let's take a look and see how this one is set up over here. As you can see, there's this giant cylinder of wool that is surrounding this skulk sensor. So if we clear away some of these blocks, you can see this thing just keeps on going up, up, up. It is fully surrounded. And let me come around this side and show you that it is completely surrounded on this side as well. But because this is so completely surrounded by wool, you can see that even if you were up here on this platform making sounds, that wool is going to block the line of sight, or I guess you'd say the line of sound, to that skulk sensor, except for this block right here. So if we take a look below this piece of chiseled deep slate, all we're going to find is more deep slate. And like I said earlier, those blocks are invisible as far as this skulk sensor is concerned. So that is why if you were standing up here, the way this was originally built, standing on top of this shaft, which is where this chiseled brick is where you need to be to trigger this circuit. Okay, so that explains how this is triggered and why it's triggered the way it is. And we've also demonstrated how a pulse extender works, but I would like to show you why that pulse extender works the way it does. So I mentioned earlier about redstone power levels, and that is vital to the way that this pulse extender works. So let me explain this real quick. If you have a redstone power source such as this redstone torch, it's going to emit a certain redstone signal strength. Most power sources emit a strength of 15. And what that means is if you have a piece of redstone dust next to it, this is powered at a power level of 15. As you extend redstone dust, it will get weaker in power. This will be 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, and so on. And you can see here that it's not as bright as these. This is very bright. This is getting very dim. And eventually, when you go far enough, it will eventually just go to 0. So as redstone power moves through redstone dust, the strength of it weakens. And it can be in any value between 0 and 15. Now visually in game, this is the only way to tell. Again, you can see that it's brighter when it's 15 and it progressively gets darker until it's completely off at 0. But if you want to remove any possibility of getting that number wrong, you kind of have to go outside of vanilla Minecraft and get a resource pack that'll actually show those redstone signal strengths. So I'm going to apply one of those resource packs for the rest of this video because it's going to make explaining some of these things a lot easier. And there you go. Okay, now with this resource pack, this is showing me that this has a level of 15, 14, 13, 12, and it counts all the way down to 0. Okay, let me go ahead and clean this up and let's get back into the circuit. So as you can see here, this redstone torch is emitting a power strength of 15. And what that means is that the adjacent redstone dust is going to be at a 15 power level. And as you can see, that signal strength weakens from 14 to 13, and then it goes into this repeater. Well, one use of the repeater is that it will actually take any redstone signal that is coming into the back of it, and it will raise that back up to 15 and send it out the front. So again, no matter what power strength is coming into the input of the repeater, the output is always going to be 15. So that is essentially why there's a repeater between this comparator and this block. Regardless of what sound you use to trigger the skulk sensor, this will read it and put it in directly into this repeater, and this repeater is going to boost it to a 15 and send a full 15 strength signal into this block. Okay, why is it important that this block is powered with a level of 15? Because if I power this block with any strength of power, it's going to make this redstone torch turn off, which is what we want it to do. But you're going to see why it's important that it's a level of 15 once we understand how this pulse extender works. So one thing that Mojang provided us with this circuit is this handy little lever on top of this block. And the purpose of this lever is that you can turn it on. It will provide a constant power to this block, keeping this torch off and keeping those doors open. So once you get inside this room, you can flick this lever and those doors will remain open, well, forever. But it was cool of them to provide that because I can also use that as part of this demonstration. So you can see that whenever this block is powered with a signal strength of 15, it is again emitting a 15 power to the adjacent redstone dust. Okay, and whenever that power goes into the back of a comparator, what a comparator does is it takes whatever strength of redstone is coming into its input and it outputs that same strength going out. That's a little different from the repeater. It takes any strength of redstone going in and then boosts it to a 15 to send it out. This just sends out whatever it receives. In this case, it's a 15. So that 15 goes into this comparator. It sends a 15 into this comparator. It sends a 15 into this comparator. And this comparator sends a 15 into this redstone dust. And now, like we talked about, redstone dust gets weaker as it goes. The ones adjacent to this 15 are one lower. This one is 14 and this one is 14. Okay, well, I'm going to pause here real quick and tell you what this weird little snaky line of redstone lamps is all about. All of this is not integral to this circuit at all. In fact, if all of this was missing, this circuit would all work exactly the same way. This whole line of redstone lamps here is only here as a visual aid to players to show you the signal strength that is going through this pulse extender. So when this circuit first turns on, and this is a 15, again, that makes this a 15, and you can see every single one of these lamps is on. If this were to reduce in power, it would reduce every one of these by 1, and lamps will start turning off. So say, for example, this was a 6. This would be a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and this would be the last lamp that was on. All the rest of these would be turned off. You're going to see that in action, again, as a visual to see how the signal strength is weakening. But again, not integral to the circuit at all. What matters is this redstone dust right here. As you can see, whenever this is at a 15, this one's a 15, except this one is now a 14. So this one is technically sending a signal strength of 14 through these comparators into this block. So if the power from this lever went away, this block would now be powered by a signal strength of 14. And now this is where we start the fun part. Whenever the power of 15 goes away, the game sees that this block is powered by a level of 14. And what that will do is it'll immediately change the strength of this redstone dust to 14. Then the 14 is going to move through these comparators to here. And when this becomes a 14, this now becomes a 13. Then that 13 will go through these comparators back into this block. The game will see that this block is now getting a power level of 13 instead of 14, and it will then emit a 13 to this redstone dust. That 13 goes through to here, that becomes a 12, the 12 goes through to here, that makes this a 12, and so on. 12, 11, 11, 11, 10, 10. And it'll do that until it hits 0. And the whole time it's doing that, this block is still receiving some amount of power, keeping this torch turned off. And with this torch off, those doors are open. And then, of course, once this countdown finally dies out to 0, this block will no longer be powered. This torch will come back on, slamming those doors shut. So there you go, pulse extender. It's going to take a pulse of energy, and it's going to extend its life as that signal moves around and around this circuit until it finally dies out. Okay, so now let's go ahead and watch this pulse extender in action. I'm going to mimic the pulse of energy coming from that skulk sensor by just flicking this lever on and then back off. As soon as I turn this lever on, you're going to see two things happen. You're going to see this torch turn off, and therefore turning off this part of the circuit. But you're also going to see this light up with a 15, and you're going to see that 15 travel through the way we spoke. You're going to see all of these lamps light up and all of these comparators. But then as soon as I turn this lever back off, you're going to see that this torch remains off. And then you're going to start seeing the signal strength here start counting down. And you're going to see all of these count down at the same rate, and you're going to see the lamps turn off as it goes. Okay, so let's do it. Ready, set, pulse on, pulse off. See how that signal strength is weakening? And as soon as that 0 gets through, this turns back on. So pulse of energy is now extended for the life of this signal going through these comparators. That's it. That's how this circuit works. So again, just to recap, for city center number 1, you have to make a noise directly on top of this chiseled deep slate, and that is because of this column of wool. Whenever that skulk sensor catches that sound, it's going to transmit it into this block, opening those doors, and putting that signal into a pulse extender, which will keep that door open until this pulse extender trickles down to 0. Again, very similar to gate number 2, where we had a pulse of power coming from this skulk sensor, flickering this torch on and off, sending that into a pulse extender, which kept the doors open. Okay, now let's move on to city center number 3. I told you before that this one is different than the other two. Now, one of those differences is that the door is already open, right? On these, the door is shut in its steady state. But this one is already open. Now, I did say earlier that there's a reason for it, so let's go see what that reason is. The reason why this door is open to begin with is because the circuit is actually broken. If we come down here to the end of this hallway and into the actual circuit room, we see a whole bunch of torches, repeaters, and redstone dust all over the floor. But all of this is connected, and it is actually doing something. But if we examine it more closely, we see right here by the door where we came into this room. Let me come back around here. So if you come down this hall and into this room, you'll notice right here that this piece of redstone dust is not attached to anything, right? This piece of dust is attached to this block, which is attached to this torch, which is attached to this redstone, etc., etc. But this one piece of dust is not attached to anything. Okay, I have to admit, when I first tried to figure out how this circuit worked, this one just completely broke my brain. I was really, really confused about this. But once I kind of sussed out what it was doing, I realized that this piece of redstone was a problem. And for this circuit to actually work correctly, this piece of redstone has to be removed and instead placed right here. So let me show you that again. It's here by default. If you remove it and place it here, this circuit will now actually work correctly. That's all you have to do to fix it. Now, in real life, I'm actually a software QA engineer. And when I saw this, I thought for sure I actually discovered a bug. Like, woohoo, I discovered a software bug in Minecraft. How smart am I? So I quickly went online and I started looking up bugs that were already filed with Mojang. And I started searching for ancient cities and redstone and everything else. And what did I find? A ton of other people already discovered this. And Mojang Development's official response was, this is broken intentionally, and it is a teaching moment for the player to learn how to fix it. Pretty cool, huh? So anyway, yeah, to fix it, again, remove this piece of dust, place it here. Now the circuit is fixed, and it actually works. But if you notice, this is still off, and those doors are still open. So now that we fixed this thing, how does it work? And this is where we hit the next fundamental way why this one is different than these two. Both of these gates are in a steady state where the doors are closed. When you activate the circuit, that puts the circuit into an activated state, those doors open. But as we discussed, it counts down and eventually goes back to its steady state, closing those doors. The circuit in City Center number 3 does not have a steady state. It can either be turned off or turned on, and it will remain in either of those two states until you activate the circuit again. And that type of circuit is referred to as a T flip-flop. It's a circuit whose state can flip-flop between one state and another state every time the circuit is activated. So let's see it in action. First of all, we need to figure out how to actually trigger this circuit. Again, in this default state, the doors are open. I would call that the circuit being, let's say the circuit is on. Now, how do we flip-flop it to be off? To activate this circuit, we're going to come back up here to the top. Now, remember, we identified this one by these two rows of walls. These rows of walls look very suspicious, and the floor between them are these deep slate tiles. This is like this for a reason. This is encouraging the player to, well, walk through the walls. Once you've walked through those walls, you have triggered this circuit. I'm sorry, you have activated this circuit. And what you have done is you have now flip-flopped it to its other state. In this case, if we go below, this should now be in the off state and those doors should be closed. So let's take a look. There it is. The doors are closed. Now these doors will stay in this state until we activate this circuit again and flip-flop it back to its other state where the doors are open. Now when we kind of look over here at this redstone circuit, all of this circuit is the T flip-flop. It is, to put it very, very simply, ridiculously confusing. But we will talk about it in a few moments. But first, I want to talk about why this is triggered by walking up and down between these walls. Okay, we saw in city gate number 2 that there's almost no wool blocking this skulk sensor, and you can activate it from pretty much any angle you want as long as you're in range. And like I said, it would be mostly this entire platform and right in front of this doorway. And we went over here to city center number 1, it had this massive column of wool completely surrounding this skulk sensor, so therefore it had to be triggered directly above it. So let's take a look at how this one is set up as far as the skulk sensor is concerned. So you can see here that it is surrounded in wool, but not quite as fully covered as the one in city center number 1. So from this side, it's covered in wool pretty much up to right about there. Yep. I think that's where it ends. Yep. On this side, it has wool. Okay, it ends there as well. And on this side, the wool, I believe, ends at the same spot. So pretty much all of these blocks are invisible as far as that skulk sensor is concerned. But you can see it's not going to take anything from this angle. If you were up, if this roof was still here, you'd be about at, let's see, about this angle here, which means you're not going to get to that skulk sensor. Same thing from this side, and same thing from this side. And those wool blocks are even going to keep you from coming at it from an angle. So if I were to break these blocks here, you see that wool is still blocking our view to that skulk sensor. Now let's hop down into the front of this thing. And you can see on this side, there's no wool. If we break these here, you can see there is no wool on this entire front side of the circuit. So what that does, let's trigger that again. There we go, flip-flop. Let's come all the way back up to the top, and as you can see, when we look at it from this angle here, you can now clearly see that if you come at this from this angle, every one of these blocks here will trigger that skulk sensor as long as you're in range. And as far as being in range, it's pretty much from this chiseled brick onward. In fact, actually, I think this chiseled brick might not even be in range. So if we stand here and make noise, we probably will not see the blue frequency animation. Yep, I think this one is just out of range. But if we go to this one and jump, there we go. You just saw the animation. This one is in range. And of course, this one is, and this one is, and of course, the floor that was in front of this is as well. So basically, 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 blocks here, if you make noise on these 4 blocks, you're going to trigger this circuit and flip-flop it to its other state. That's it. So now we know how to trigger this circuit and why. Okay, now let's go inside here and take a look. So again, we see the same old comparator reading the signal from the skulk sensor. And from this point on, the rest of this circuit is ridiculously complex and hard to explain. So I'm going to do my best to kind of describe how it changes state. And then we're going to do something where we're going to take a look at this thing one tick at a time and actually watch it do its thing. Okay, so as you can see, right now this piece of redstone dust is being held on, which is keeping this block powered, keeping this torch off. And that is what's keeping these doors open. So this is being powered by this redstone torch right here. This torch is powered because this block does not have any power going to it. See, with this one off, this redstone dust is not powering the block. And with this torch off, this redstone dust and repeaters are not powering that block. So if we trigger this circuit and we flip-flop it to its other state is going to have this block being powered. When this block is powered, this torch turns off, thus this line of redstone turns off, meaning that there is no longer power to this block, turning this torch on and closing the doors. And all of the rest of this is what makes that happen. This entire circuit relies on timing. Every single one of these torches and repeaters and redstone lines changes state in a very, very, very specific order. And whoever the redstone engineer is who came up with this is a freaking genius. I swear. It was hard enough for me to understand how this thing worked, let alone being able to design something this complex. I'm going to mimic the pulse coming from this skulk sensor by using a button. So if I click this button, that's essentially going to be the same thing as this comparator putting in the pulse of power that it got from that skulk sensor. So when I hit this button, you're going to see this entire circuit start triggering. And as it triggers, you're going to see the redstone kind of walk its way through it. Now, it's going to go really fast, and it's going to be really hard to see standing down there on the floor. So I'm going to utilize another third-party tool to help demonstrate what's happening here. And that tool is called Flashback. You might not have heard of Flashback, but you may have heard of Replay. It's a mod that you can add to Minecraft. And essentially all it is a way to record your game in a way that's detached from your character. So that way, after the fact, in editing, you can make those cool third-person point of view cinematic shots and things like that. But one thing that's really cool about Flashback is you can actually walk through the recording one game tick at a time. And I'm going to use that to demonstrate how this T flip-flop circuit actually works. So first, let me start recording. Now, right now, the doors are open, and I'm going to trigger the circuit one time. Okay, you just saw all the redstone flash and all the things change state, and now this is on, and the doors are closed. So now, if I trigger this circuit again and flip-flop it back to its other state, you're going to see that redstone go through it, and now that is off, and the doors are open again. So now let me go ahead and finish that recording and save it. Okay, so here I am now inside the recording. This is inside Flashback. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make my player go away. That way we can concentrate on what the actual circuit is doing. Okay, so here I am above this circuit, and we're going to see this redstone kind of travel through here. I've actually tried numerous times to figure out a way to explain everything that's happening, and it is really impossible to explain. So I'm just going to show it to you in a nice kind of slow motion kind of way. Okay, so right now we're going to click this button and go. And now we're going to just start walking through it one tick at a time, and you're going to see this redstone changing state. Okay, we're pulsing power into those repeaters. That's going to turn those torches off. That actually pulses power to that bottom redstone torch here, turning this on here. And as that signal goes through these repeaters, you're going to see it power this block, which you notice this lit up, but these torches attached to this block now turn off. And whenever these turn off, the one main thing that's happened here is this is going to turn off, and so is this. So these two lines both turn off. Okay, with this one off, you're going to see now these torches come on. And when this torch comes on, it's going to light up this circuit, which is going to lead to our door. And as we progress through, you can see now this repeater turn this on, and then you're going to see this repeater go that way, and then that will close the doors. And now it's in its flip-flop state, where this is held on. So now I can forward through to where we flip-flopped it the other way. So now you're going to see the exact same thing happen in reverse. It's going to start out the same way. It's going to pulse power to these repeaters, which will change the state. In this case, I think it'll change the state of this torch, which will light this signal up, turning these off, and it'll kind of reverse the state of all of these other redstone lines. So let me go ahead and forward through this, and you can kind of just watch and see it happen. And here we go. Press in the button, and now the beginning part happens the same way. We get that pulse of power. Now these two torches turn off, and we're going to see this one turn on. That power's on this line here. And when this line comes on, these two torches go off, turning off this signal, turning all of this redstone off. And of course, that turns off this signal, which once this signal is off, it turns this torch on and it turns this repeater off, thus opening the doors. Okay, did you get all that? Do you now understand how this T flip-flop works? Because I sure don't. Actually, in all seriousness, I did sit down with this thing for a couple hours, and I actually did figure out exactly why all of those state changes do what they do. And again, like I said, it's just impossible for me to explain. But hopefully seeing it in action, at least kind of you see the motion of the redstone moving through the circuit, and you can see the state changes. And then once certain torches are held on or held off, that's what kind of keeps it in its flip-flop state. And you know, it's a funny thing, if they actually waited a couple of releases before they made this circuit, they could replace this entire circuit with one single block. Can you guess what that block is? If you said copper bulb, you're the winner. So yeah, the copper bulb itself is a T flip-flop. As you can see, when you activate it, it flips to its on state, and it stays in this state until you activate it again. Next time you activate it, it flip-flops to off. And you can actually integrate this into a circuit simply by putting a redstone comparator leading out of it, and then a redstone repeater to boost the signal to 15, and then some redstone dust. So now you can see it's off. Click it once, you've now flipped this to on, and it's going to stay on. Click it again, and you flip it off. So that entire circuit, everything from, if you put a bulb right here and then a comparator leading into this, that could replace this entire circuit. Now, when you think about how excited redstone people got when that copper bulb came out, this is why. And although there are much, much easier ways to make T flip-flop circuits than this monstrosity, that is way easier. Okay, to recap, when you come to City Center number 3, the doors are going to always be open. And that's because the circuit starts out in the off state and it starts out broken. So you have to come into this circuit, and remember, this piece of redstone dust here, you need to remove and place it here. At that point, you can flip-flop the state between open and closed simply by coming up here and walking between these two walls. And the next time you make noise on one of these blocks here, it's going to flip-flop to its other state. Okay, I think that about concludes this video. In this video, we explored the differences between the redstone circuits in all 3 of the different ancient city center gates. We learned how to activate each one properly, and we looked at the circuits and talked about why the circuits work the way they do. Again, after exploring these, I am so incredibly impressed by the engineering and design between all 3 of these circuits. Whoever the folks were on the Mojang staff that designed these, you did an amazing, amazing job. This is some really, really cool stuff, way more advanced than I would ever expect to see existing in the vanilla game of Minecraft by default. I hope you enjoyed watching me walk through this as much as I enjoyed learning it. And I'm sure some of you are probably still really, really confused on how some of this stuff works. But I encourage you, hop into a creative world, summon these structures in the game, and just go take a look at them yourself. If you're anything like me, then you get way more excitement out of understanding how something works more than just knowing how it works. Well, before you go, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to spend it here with me. I had a lot of fun. I sure hope you did too. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.